Delit's face is like clay. He pokes one side, and when his finger hovers several inches from it, it sinks back into place. Or rather, it will be more like slime. His mouth is a balloon, his tongue is a disease, and his teeth are accessories to make the mouth feel fuller. The cotton balls are lifelines. They need to stay in his mouth, in between his teeth as he clenches them, sticking out from his mouth. The blood sinking into the cotton causes it to swell up like he's choking on them. They're filled with drugs that make the room feel like an ice block and a magma pit at the same time. He sees the wallpaper crawling, but the wall doesn't even have paper on it. His fingers twitch, but his joints don't move. His hands are covered in bandages, and his body needs to remain silently rested on the bed. His eyes dart around the room like he's got nothing better to do, and his only distraction is a book of a woman that's attempting to grieve over her dead husband. A published journal by an author that thinks being a widow is the end of her life, and that every other woman who suffers this dreadful curse should just live with the suffering and die alone. It's not a particularly morbid journal, it's just saturated in a way that makes it seem she's content at the idea of being a widow. He knows he's delusional because he's overthinking a piece of literary trauma that was written by a failed alcoholic author. He shouts out, screaming through his throat. He can't speak, so it vibrates through his ears. The door to his bedroom gets opened, his mother coming in with a bottle of that mouth-numbing concoction and a cotton ball pinched between her fingers. He shakes his head as fast as he can physically manage in the state of healing. His one eye swollen shut, he experiences most of the pain from the parts that are visibly damaged. Dolores, what are you doing? What do you want? Delit points to his nightstand, an empty glass staring back at him, with his reflection mimicking the same miserable image of a boy with a mouth stuffed full of cotton balls. She takes his glass and exits the room with a cotton ball pressing against the glass. She leaves without a word, and Delit's left with his own thoughts again, processing the pattern on the ceiling, counting his breaths, twitching his toes. Before a scream erupts from the back of his throat, he rips his pillow out from the back of his head, throwing it against the wall. Letting tears run down his face, he can't even take a deep breath, for the pain his joints just experienced when he picked up his pillow is unbearable. His light pillow, that tends to heal the injured joints in his neck once the school day ends, hurt the joints in his elbows. His knuckles feel like rocks, tied into his nerves, blocking the blood from flowing properly. His eyes are puffed up from the pain and swelling, and the crying. He's got fists painted across his body like the canvas of a mentally ill artist. He falls backwards on his bare mattress, crying into the void. His mother opens the door and produces a glass of iced water, with a straw sitting in between the ice cubes, peeking out from the glass. She makes sure to wrap his hands around the cylinder and then directs the straw towards his mouth, injecting it in between the cotton balls. With his tongue and his breath cooperating with one another, he's able to push the water through the straw, but it makes everything worse. The water travels through those blood-soaked cotton balls, turning the clear water's pure sweet flavor into that of an iron one that has Delit spitting the cotton balls as well as the water over his own pajamas and his mother's hand, tainting the ice water and spitting the medically soaked cotton out from his cramped-up teeth. His mother runs out of the bedroom, returning to dip at least 3 more cotton balls in the numbing liquid that was prescribed by the doctor. She shoves it down his pipe hole to the point where the back of his throat starts to feel like a trash chute. She returns with another glass of water and then helps him once more to sip it through, patiently allowing him to spit some back that spills over his sheets before pulling the glass away and wiping his mouth with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. She leaves the glass of water on the nightstand and Delit sitting on his mattress. He stands up, almost crawling towards the desk if it weren't for the fact that his knees are also purple. He doesn't even know when he injured them. He just recalls waking up this morning and experiencing the most unbearable feeling of twisting certain parts of his body. He tries moving his knuckles to pick up a pen and try and write something, but the feeling is like a toddler biting down on his knuckles. He drops the pen and bites through the cotton balls, but the liquid in his mouth is doing something to his vision as well. He sees the pen as a squiggle on the table, rolling and wiggling, dancing its way to the end of the table. His eyes cross, experiencing the feeling of fingers stroking his brain. His hands placed flat down on the desk, he tries reaching for a handbook, slipping it off the stack of educational literature. He flips the book open, and the words look like smiley faces running up and down the pages. The squiggles of smileys take shape, and they start to form letters that are still wriggling around. He can barely absorb the color of the page. It looks pink to purple, purple to blue, blue to green, green to yellow, and yellow to orange, before it starts shading blue out of the norm and erasing the figures of letters altogether. He slaps his handbook shut and throws it across the room. He wants to pound his fist into the desk from frustration. His ears hear things like an echo, the sound bouncing off the other side of the room, and his fingers feel like he stuffed them in an ant farm. He starts scratching his cheeks before pulling his hands away, afraid that he might have whatever's crawling on his hands choose to start crawling on his face. He's so numb to the point where his brain can't even process what pain is. He can't even process the feeling of teeth. Squishing the cotton balls and pinching them in his mouth, the sap running down his jaw. The color is red, but then it turns pink. He puts his hand on his mouth, rocking himself on his chair, squealing to himself. He climbs onto the floor. His entire body feels like there are hands crushing his bones. He can still feel the impact of Duncan's fists when he looks at his bruises. The pain hurts, and then he just thinks about Darius and where his best friend could possibly be. Truth in the realm of lies, his best friend doesn't want to associate with his mortal emotions. He can't associate with pain, tears, anger, or anything that results in emotional effort from his end. He's a physical asset, but not an emotional investment. These thoughts don't help Delit, crinkling his eyes shut and squeezing the cotton balls between his teeth. The headache turns into a knock on his bedroom door before he hears it open. He flips his head around, leaning on a sore bone, but then again, all of his bones feel sore. It's an inevitable conclusion he can't escape. The cotton balls make everything better. The harder he bites, the better he feels. It feels more itchy than numbing, the feeling of a dozen tiny feet traveling across his inner gums. Then his eyes tear up and they start pouring with liquid like he drools when he sleeps. Within several seconds, he's fast asleep, dreaming of something he can't manifest into an explanation. A blob of color hands him a gun. Another blob that doesn't have a descriptive color hands him a piece of gum. He's guided by the hands of light to put the gum in the gauge of the gun. It's directed upwards, slowly turning his direction. He faces the barrel. The dark core of it has disco lights spinning around the tube. The swirls capture him like a hallucinogenic drug that sends him spiraling into the pit of something else before the shot is fired, blowing a hole in his teeth. The piece is falling out his mouth and right in front of his toes. He lifts his head, staring at the barrel of the gun. No longer the barrel of a gun, but the tip of Duncan's index finger. Blue paint runs down his chin, the drops falling at his feet, covering the pieces of his teeth. He can taste the gum, but the flavor dissipated before he could even analyze it. Duncan's expression is blank, his left eye twitching from reaction. He lowers his hand and turns his gaze away. Only the eyes would stare back at him, until finally the life and soul inside of them turns pale. Delit gets shot out of his dreams by the feeling of something stepping on his neck. His eyes shot open as he felt the dog sitting on top of him, licking his cheeks and his forehead, trying to get him to wake up. She let out a loud bark that bounced off the walls and back into Delit's head. It started bouncing back and forth in his skull like a jar of scattered marbles. His clenched teeth and his screaming drew his mother into the room, where she grabbed the dog by the collar and yanked him away from her son. Dolores, Delit, I'm so sorry. I was trying to bring you new sheets and I couldn't carry the laundry basket and open the door at the same time. Delit? His mother's questioning tone was nothing short of just a vibration in the same environment as him. Like two birds mimicking each other, but one has no idea what the other is saying. Delit just threw his hand in the air, trying to swing his mother out of his view, but his arm felt like a piece of meat falling flat to his side, too heavy to lift. It felt severed from the rest of his body, and so did his legs. His eyes opened, his room looked like a sunbeam, burning his vision to the point where it only made him scream even louder. Dolores, yes, I hope you feel the effects, and next time you'll think twice about fighting random boys in the afternoon. And Delit did think twice. In fact, it was all Delit had to think about throughout the noon to the afternoon, when he was sliding cards around on the floor as his dog was trying to cheer him up by pushing her snout against the cards, trying to copy whatever her owner does so she can gain extra attention. He slapped her skull from time to time, but Daisy's such a patient pup that she leaned even harder into the heavy head pats to receive whatever affection or attention Delit was willing to offer today. She tried putting her paw down on his hip, but Delit's groan made her back away, folding her ears back and lowering her tail to indicate submission. Delit's mouth sounds were enough for Daisy to translate his expressions. She rolled onto her back and let him use her as a pillow when he accidentally passed out once more. His pain was starting to feel a little less physical and more so under the skin. The medication was spreading from his teeth to his torso where he felt numb to the touch, and too numb to even crawl back into his own bed. Daisy remained still, like a prop to his sleep schedule. His comfort was her priority. Until Delit's mother chased her out and called for Delit's father to drag him onto the mattress, she threw 2 layers of sheets over his frame and allowed his head to sink into a spare pillow after fluffing it. Delit's injuries lasted several days before he was capable of moving without experiencing any pain. The amount of cotton balls he counted in his trash bin once the week was over was almost like counting the coins in his piggy bank. He saved up enough cotton balls to donate blood. His teeth felt stronger once he was able to move again, and he was able to meet Darius at the park again. Darius wrapped his arms around Delit first, which shocked Delit, but he returned the gesture by patting Darius's shoulders. The feeling was unfamiliar, but welcome nonetheless. At least now he could squeeze Darius and not blood-soaked cotton balls if he started feeling stressed out. On a school morning, Duncan was in the boys' bathroom, twisting his wrists and pressing his knuckles, cracking each one to glare back at himself in the mirror, frustrated by the mocking expression that haunts him like the manifestation of a horrible memory. He exited the bathroom and was making his way down the hall. He caught Delit excitedly throwing his hands around while his ginger friend was just snorting laughter as a reaction. When Delit caught Duncan's eye, they were staring long enough for Darius to take notice. Darius waved in Duncan's direction, only for a blatant middle finger to be the response. He turned his back to the 2 boys and stormed away in the opposite direction, ending up in the courtyard where he can recall such fond feelings that drew him into comfort. He still touches his cheek when he thinks of how Delit threw a punch, his jaw still buzzing when remembering chasing Delit through the classroom of desks. He hates himself a lot of the time, but Delit made him feel better, even if just for an afternoon. This makes Duncan curious. Hearing the whisper surrounding him of students either just coincidentally whispering next to him or students gossiping about his abusive nature is tiring. He's tired of feeling like the beast, so he decided he'll find some common ground for him and Delit. He distracted himself in class by attempting to hand a note to the student in front of him, so the student in front of him could hand it down to Darius, who would then hand it to Delit. But the paper never reached any further than Darius, who kept crumpling up the paper and shoving it in his bag. An agitated Duncan reached over and grabbed the boy's neck that was sitting next to him. He growled in his ear. Duncan, circle around him. Seatmate, oh, okay. Duncan folded his 6th sticky note and handed it to his seatmate. The seatmate leaned outside of his chair and handed it to one of the classmates sitting in the 3rd row. The note made its way from a girl, a boy, a girl, another girl, and then a boy. When the note reaches out towards Delit, Darius snatches it from the grasp of the boy sitting beside Delit and crumples it up, tossing it in his bag once again. Duncan slams his fist against the table, the thud of the desk bouncing off the walls, drawing the classroom's attention to him. Duncan scratches the back of his neck, clawing at the top of the desk. Female teacher, is something the matter? Seatmate, nothing, ma'am. I'm just focusing super hard. Female teacher, alrighty, if any of you boys are having trouble, don't hesitate to ask. Female classmate, and the girls? Female teacher, let's be honest, one is smarter than the other. Some of the girls snicker, while some of the boys exaggerate their expressions in an offended manner. Duncan's seatmate lowers his head to whisper to Duncan. Seatmate, maybe you just want to talk to Delit during lunch. Duncan's fist takes shape with the way his fingers curl, and that's what pushes these reaching hands away. His naturally destructive reaction that has to reach out and attack something for his failures. Duncan would have considered cornering Delit, but it seemed like a bad idea the more he thought about it, so he thought instead that he'd join the boys for lunch. He even picked up a metal food tray for the sake of fitting in with the rest of the students. As Duncan was standing in line, he felt like he could swallow his tongue and choke on it. A familiar-looking female standing just ahead of him, reaching forward to point at the burnt sausages, about to make a remark, but her platter was slapped with a mountain of potato salad. She nodded in approval as if she had just been offered a payoff. Not that any of the other students was going to finish that particular dish. They finished the line by handing each student an apple, something that would have been insignificant had it not caught Duncan's attention as much as it did. He was unsure of what this meant for the moment, but would store it as useful information in case it would help him. Duncan then went striding down the cafeteria aisle like he was the king of a broken village decorated in poverty. The peasants ducked their heads or glared up at him. Having a height that stretches as far as Duncan's allows him to intimidate students that would otherwise not hesitate to corner him. But because it's such an unusual height, coupled with his father's training tactics fueled by abuse, he's the meanest machine to prowl the school grounds. Any student coming in close radar with this passionately aggressive young man would sure follow more secure strategies in the future. Duncan approached the table where Darius and Delit were sat alone, in the back to avoid all the other groups and clubs that were gathered together in hordes of pupils. Duncan approaching made both Darius and Delit each take a bite to avoid from saying anything, or at least to pretend they can't talk to him because their mouths are full. He slammed his tray down. Nothing was in his tray. He just had the metal plate slammed down on the table that attracted the attention of several groups surrounding the table. Some of the girls' eyes widened as the other boys turned their heads away, determined that if anything went wrong, they just so happened to have remained oblivious. As teachers have confronted students about not confronting bullies when they witness incidents like these. Mainly, they blamed the boys, so they knew the rules by now to avoid conflict from either side, whether it be by faculty or Duncan himself. Duncan. So? Darius almost choked on his breath when Duncan opened his mouth. He didn't want to sit here for longer than he had to, but he could at least invest his time for Delit's sake, as long as he just bit his lower lip to keep his jaw locked in place. Delit. Are you here to apologize or just be an ass about it? Darius. Delit. Darius patted his shoulder, which caused Duncan to slam his fists on the table as well. The awkward tension caused both boys to lock their attention onto Duncan, and the other half witnessing their lunch trays to keep their eyes off the location of the noise, because they already know who's making all that ruckus. Delit. Can you get lost? I don't want you here. What do you even want with us? Duncan. I thought we were friends. Delit. Excuse me? Delit's expression twisted into a scowl. Delit. You gave me a concussion. What's wrong with you? Get away from our table or I'm calling a teacher. Duncan's brows crossed. His eyes darkened as he gave Darius a death glare. He threw his chair back into the floor, the chair clattering because of its metal structure hitting the tiles. He stomped out of the cafeteria, throwing the doors open. When they swung back around, they swung past the doorway and back shut. Some of the boys shuddered, others acted like it didn't even happen. The lunch ladies turned to each other, shrugging as if it was none of their business, which it probably wasn't, but it couldn't have hurt for an adult to have gotten involved. After school, Duncan was sat at the back of the school, sitting on a bench right beside the back gate, at the far end of the school's garden, which would lead the path directly towards the gardening club and the vegetables and fruit trees. Duncan had no interest in that path, nor the patches of flowers that blessed the person to rest on one of these benches. He was here for the opposite of relaxation, the purpose of destruction and allowing himself to fuel his thoughts with anger. He was clawing at the knees of his jeans, his fingers scraping dirt across the blue threads. His fists were covered in red sores that stretched from his knuckles to the joints in his fingers. The evidence of his anger lies in the skin cells he left on the tree sitting beside the bench, the tree bark in the sores allowing for more of a visual confirmation. His brows have never furrowed deeper, his clenched teeth have never clamped against one another this hard before, to the point where his gums feel crushed under the pressure. His nostrils never flared like this, feeling the fresh air burning the core of his nasal pipe with how fast he's breathing. He needs to hit something that'll be able to suffer at the bottom of his wrath. This tree is a terrible opponent. His knuckles feel like exposed bones. The wind blows him kisses on his knuckles that make them feel like lit matches. His hands bruised and his ego not looking any better. He wants to cry, but anger is the only emotion he's capable of expressing at its full capacity. He sat in silence long enough to breathe. It went through his nostrils and then out of his mouth. He settled his fingers on his jeans, closing his eyes and feeling Mother Nature wrapping him in a hug, with the atmosphere around him as the wind was starting to settle. He felt like the sun washing over him like flowers falling from the trees during spring season. It felt beyond soothing, beyond comprehension for Duncan. He felt his jaw quiver, his hands settle on his knees, frozen still as he sat cross-legged on the bench. He was about to let a tear pass the barricades of his lashes. He got sucked back in when he heard a familiar voice cutting his calm time. Duncan almost started praying with the way he was sat, as his mother always promised that God would always know what he was going through, but the interruption was fatal at this point. "Darius, what's your problem?" Darius's hands were sinking into his pockets. Duncan's brows almost kissed with how close they were to one another when he saw Darius. His casual stance, his gaze probably shifted into one of judgment, his excuse for bothering Duncan the same as everybody else's reason. There's something wrong with him, and Darius came to find out what it was. Duncan didn't want therapy. He wanted someone to give him an excuse to punch them. Before Darius could open his mouth again, Duncan jumped from his sitting position, towering over Darius. Darius's hands were removed from his pockets. "Duncan, what did you say to me?" "Darius, you'll back away from Delit, and if you don't, I'll deal with you." "Duncan, you little fairy, look at you. I think you bit the wrong mushroom. Flap your wings back home, fairy, or I'll clip them for you." "Darius, and you think I'm on shrooms?" Duncan raised his fist, but Darius ducked like Delit did the first time Duncan encountered him. He threw his fist in the side of Duncan's neck, but the muscle bounced his fist back almost like a trampoline. Duncan flipped around, throwing his heavy arms around, trying to grab something of Darius, only grabbing the holster of his bag. Darius slipped out from the arms of his bag and threw his fist right in the middle of Duncan's face. Duncan grabbed the fist like he saw Darius fail, but Darius twisted himself under Duncan's arm, twisting the wrist where Duncan felt something snap. He groaned and screamed in rage as he tried swiping Darius, who kept circling him like a squirrel, but Darius's elbow caught him right in the jaw. He yanked Darius's ankle out from under his stance. He managed to flip him backwards, but he rolled onto the grass and jumped on his hands and feet. He lunged at Duncan like a dog, catching the boulder of a being off guard, throwing his entire frame into Duncan's face. He clawed at his cheeks and close to the edge of his eye. Duncan fell on his back, trying to throw Darius off like a wild alley cat. But Darius flipped off his body, falling on his own back. His breath was heavy, wheezing, and almost coughing. Duncan groveled backwards on his feet and the palms of his hands scraping against the dirt, feeling the burning marks on his face of Darius's claws. Darius's pocket accidentally flapped open when he jumped back, and his inhaler sat several feet in between the grass. Darius managed to flip onto his stomach, trying to claw his way towards the inhaler. Duncan watched, almost scared of Darius's movements. He jumped up like a scared little worthless youth and kicked the inhaler out of Darius's way. He stared at Darius like he thought it was a demon crawling out of the TV. He jumped backwards before another boy with a group of friends entered the school's garden. A girl screeched in Duncan's ear as the other males were dashing to help Darius. One reached into the grass and picked up the inhaler from in between the shrubs. Because it was blue, it stood out like a sore thumb, and thank goodness for that, since Darius's favorite colors are orange and blue. Duncan and both Darius were taken to the principal's office. Duncan's mother, as well as Darius's father, looked over the situation, eyeing both boys and then looking back at a group of 4 boys and a lonesome female. The principal raised a brow, twisting his expression like he just licked a lemon. Principal Olive, "I'm sorry, what?" Duncan twisted his face, his glare carrying quivering shift. Darius sat with his hands between his knees, keeping his chin down. His father patted his shoulders, looking for the principal's sympathy. "Eden," Darius's father. "Listen, sir, Darius is a good kid. He's never ever hurt anybody, ever. I assume this tall young man probably intimidated him." Why is he English? Duncan shoved his hands in his jacket's pockets. His left leg was bouncing up and down with anxiety flowing through his blood. He doesn't know why his heart beats like he's got a wild dog breathing on his neck when he's sitting next to Darius. But the one thing Duncan knows is that he caught a glimpse of something in Darius that his father also had. A small size but a vicious presence. Desiree, "I'm so sorry, sir. Duncan is very anxious, especially since he got braces. He's been so insecure, and what if the other students are verbally abusing him for them?" Principal Olive, "This is the most peculiar incident since the opening of the school. The giant getting chased by the jack, but he's so small and you're so big. Duncan, tell me what happened." Duncan curled his lips and turned his head. His brows crossed even further. He was breathing through his nose, feeling warm water boiling behind his sockets. He tried breathing in and out to keep himself from cracking like an egg, so he kept his mouth shut to keep the yolk from leaking. "Principal Olive, I'm sorry, Mr. Dawser, but your son does not look innocent in this situation. Duncan always has an explanation, even when he doesn't have a foot to stand on. This behaviour coming from someone so loud is suspicious. I can't give him unnecessary detention. It'll just encourage the idea of favoritism and picking sides. Of course he tends to get himself in trouble, but in this case I really can't say he's guilty. He was scared for his life, and when Darius was having a moment, Duncan attempted to keep the boy from standing up. Both are in some way guilty parties, but Darius looks particularly worse. We also need to take into account that Duncan is, of course, a victim of a very destructive household that has led him into this world with certain beliefs. I refuse to give either detention. Duncan, I don't want you to think I'm picking sides. I'm only doing this to punish you for all the other times you've gotten away with these actions. I apologize to both of you and beg of you to just teach both children the moral values of our society. Again, I apologize for my decision. I just don't have anyone to confirm what caused these results." Darius, "Thank you, Principal Olive. I'm sorry, Principal Olive. I'll try my best to behave next time." Darius put his hands on his knees, receiving a pat on the shoulder from his father. Duncan's mother ruffled his hair a bit, which made him look up at the ceiling to try and catch a glimpse of her jaw. But she kept her face out of view with her hair. Darius stood up first and left. It took Duncan another minute so he could ensure Darius was out of sight. Duncan had blood in his mouth. In between his braces, he spat it out in the sink and washed his mouth out with water, the shades in between his white teeth mocking him for his pathetic reaction. His hands gripping the sink like he could pull it out of the wall if he so pleased. Duncan licked his teeth in his reflection, his brows lowering as his jaw started quivering. He was glaring at himself, seeing that glass texture cross over his dark green swamp-shaded irises. He slammed his head forward into the glass of the mirror and shattered his reflection with a reward of blood running down from his forehead to his jaw, to the lower part of his neck. Down his shirt and under his shirt, down his chest and towards his pants. He removed his clothes and climbed into the bathtub, ignoring the footprints he left on the bathroom floor. He tainted the water and shaded it pink before he washed his forehead, now tainted with a shade of red. As long as he could stop his father's eyes from glaring back at him, he'd continue to smash that mirror in, whether it be with his fists or his forehead. He would not bring that man's presence back into this family. There's a moment in the day where everyone has to do a little self-reflection, whether it just be overlooking the bad parts or especially choosing to focus on the bad parts, or refusing to focus on either parts and just staring at his own reflection until he can't feel either emotion any longer. That part in the day is when Delit readjusts his course in life and considers whether or not Duncan is truly as dangerous as he believed him to be when he found him willing to commune with both him and Darius, and then Delit just chased him away. So Delit made the strongly passive decision of meeting Duncan at his front door. 3 knocks on the door and Duncan's mother slipped out of bed to open the front door. Delit's heartbeat started racing when he realized that he no longer had the second option of making eye contact with the right eye. Duncan's mother only has one side of her face that functions like a human's. The other side looks like something out of a hell-inspired horror movie. His speech was stuck in his throat as Duncan's mother chose to speak first. "Desiree." "Hello, who are you?" She spoke in a childish tone that would be that of a 5-year-old greeting a stranger at the door, ignorantly as well as curiously. Delit: "I was hoping to speak to Duncan." Desiree: "Duncan, are you sure? You're not going to hurt him, are you? I do have to warn you. Daniel came home last night in order to make sure Duncan was all right. See, Duncan had a little bit of a scrape in the bathroom, and Daniel stayed the whole night through. They've been fighting a lot, but I can tell that Daniel is proud of Duncan's ability to take responsibility." His mother's gibberish makes this all the more uncomfortable until the scenario is interrupted by one of the brothers. Delit thought Duncan was tall, muscular, and the cause of death being accidental eye contact, but this boy, or rather man, pure muscle meat that could throw him into a concrete wall and shatter his skull like an eggshell, is the size of a polar bear with the grin of a supervillain. Scars spread across his face, not as bad as his mother's, but the kind that has one thinking somebody in this family should be legally restrained from having the liberty of holding a regular kitchen knife. Daniel, who's this? Delit held his facial expression frozen in place, knowing full well that all attention is on him, including this giant that could probably squeeze his brains out from his ears like spaghetti with just one hand alone. One eye looks like a snowstorm, and the other is pure lit lime green, his left cheek looking like a shark took a jab at it. No wonder Duncan is the way that he is. If his brother looks like this, and he's not even a criminal, he can only imagine what the father must have looked like. Desiree, he's a friend, I think. Daniel, he's not the one with the inhaler, is he? Desiree, what's that? Daniel took his mother by her shoulders and gently guided her in the direction of the staircase. She humbly accepted free passage from Delit's presence before Daniel addressed Delit with numbing eye contact. He thought the doctor's drugs were bad. The look Daniel's eyes is like an abused dog. So gentle, so kind, but so rough-looking and unpredictable and intimidating. He struggles to take in Daniel's presence. Daniel, what do you want? He says it more casually rather than threateningly. Delit, I was hoping to see Duncan since, he sat by my table yesterday and, we sort of chased him away, and I wanted to apologize, since, if, I wanted to make friends and, couldn't 'cause of, Daniel twists his chipped brow into his blind eye, which accidentally makes Delit squeak. Daniel, I don't know what you just said. Whatever. Duncan! He shouts right in front of Delit, making him jump. Like a little boy in the back of the hall that stands behind Daniel, Duncan peeks his head out from his bedroom door. His eyes widen and brows raise when he and Delit make eye contact. Delit raises his hand to wave him over, but just casually waves in a manner of greeting instead. Daniel, your friend's here. Duncan walked out of his room still in his pajamas, wearing a shirt with a kitten on it and blue sleeping shorts that have little paw prints scattered across them. Delit almost feels humbled by the sight of such horrifyingly gigantic human specimens acting in such a civil way. Duncan approached like a curious cat, his feet carrying him down the hallway. Duncan looks like a child in comparison to his brother. Duncan stands there like a kindergartner being forced to make friends under the supervision of his mother. Duncan awkwardly reaches out while looking at Daniel for approval. He holds his hand out for Delit to shake it. Delit just stares at it for several seconds too long before he reaches forward. The grip on his hand is tight, forceful, and painful, but it feels nice with the way Duncan looks at him like he's scared and confused at the same time. Delit almost wants to develop a sort of paternal protection over Duncan with the way he's looking at him, but he has to remember why he's here. Daniel, you guys just gonna keep standing at the front of the door? Duncan pulls Delit in, still gripping his hand. He turns around, curling his fingers around Delit's hand. Daniel smiles in a way that indicates pride. He's proud of his brother for making a friend. This is so sad it makes Delit want to squeeze Duncan's hand in reassurance, but for some reason his instincts keep wanting to pull him away. Duncan takes Delit to the backyard where there's an empty pool, a yard with tall grass, and a couple of trees ominously looming over the boys, lacking the branches that would prevent them from climbing the trees. This observation of the trees allows Delit to note that there are berries on the trees. Little, dark blue berries on the trees. He pulls them towards a wall of rocks that leads them down a turnaround in the backyard, which is a skip over a hill before they get introduced to a small group of trees that look gathered like a makeshift woodland. Duncan, what do you want from me? Delit, what? Duncan, what do you want to do? Delit, shouldn't you tell me? Duncan, you came here. Delit, Duncan, relax. I'm here for you. We'll do what you want to do. Duncan's head turns back to the house. He anxiously shakes his head, gripping his shirt, his eyebrows still crossed like he could blow a fuse at any moment, which he might have already. Duncan, he won't let us. That gives Delit enough of an understanding to know that Duncan wants to hit Delit and he wants Delit to hit him back. Delit squints his eyes, pointing at the trees. Delit, how about we climb some of the trees? It looks like there are berries up there. At first he was expecting Duncan to add the fact that they're not allowed to climb the trees, but instead he got him nodding with approval, considering that it would be more appropriate than Duncan's idea of fun. He hoisted Delit on an upper branch, allowing him to grab hold of branches placed almost like nature's handles. Duncan swung himself up on the hip of the tree, locking his bare foot in between a fold of 2 branches. He climbs like he knows the way, so Delit just attempts to follow his lead. Honestly, this is making Delit a little envious of Duncan's strong build, watching his muscle tighten with each hoist. He's the size of a bodybuilder, the inspiration of a mountain, and the danger of having a picnic on the edge of a cliff. Delit is envious of what Duncan has, those big arms, his chiseled calves, and those broad shoulders. He's wearing pajamas, and he climbs the tree 3 times faster than Delit, wearing a pair of shorts and sneakers that were made for hiking. Delit almost slips off a smooth branch as Duncan lowers his abdomen, grabbing his wrist and swinging him up on the same level as him. Delit's face is flustered by the accidental slip since the branch was the size of his body. It wasn't even that smooth. They sit in the middle of the shrubs, the berries growing in bundles, and allowing them the privilege of just reaching out and grabbing a handful. Duncan's able to reach further, snapping off a bunch by breaking the twig they're growing on. He drops it in Delit's lap, expecting something from him. Delit, it's a pretty big tree. Why are the berries all the way up here? Duncan, Madone cuts the trees from time to time. We've got more than enough berries filling up the fridge. Too many. Delit's face goes pale. His jaw tightens for a moment, his eyes twitching as he turns to Duncan with the expression that says he would have shoved him off this branch if Delit was strong enough. Well, Duncan is casually squeezing berries in between his fingers. Delit, you made us climb? And there are berries in the house? Duncan looks up at Delit, a brow furrowed. Duncan, I thought that's what you wanted. Delit, I wanted to have berries with you, Duncan. Duncan, oh shoot, almost like you said babies. Nah, Delit, this is better. Way more exercise, more bonding momentum. And you almost died, and I saved you. Delit, I highly doubt I would have died. I think it just would have broken my legs. Duncan bites a berry before responding. Duncan, nah, I would have put your tombstone right under this tree. Delit shakes his head, but he gets caught off guard by something when Duncan turns his head towards him. The eye contact is one thing that makes him think twice, but the next are several small scratches under the corner of his eye and the side of the same claw marks on one side of his jaw. Duncan, why are you looking at me like that? Delit, what happened to your face? Duncan's expression shifted from an almost smile to a distant stare that's glued to the grass sitting 10 feet from their dangling feet. Duncan, there's something wrong with that friend of yours. Delit, what friend? Darius? Duncan, who else? Delit, I have other friends, like Shannon, Roderick, Jeff, Hank, Lacey. There's Unity, but I think she's kind of more of a council mom than anything. Wait, no, that's not the point. Are you serious? Duncan, believe me or don't, I don't care. Delit turns to look at Duncan, trying to analyze his expression. Watching as he tosses a berry on the ground, a bird swoops out from the side and snatches the berry out of sight. Not a big bird, a tiny colorful one that Delit has never seen before, but he's not one for bird watching, so the interest is lacking. But the interest in whether or not Duncan is telling the truth is certainly there. Delit, Darius wasn't waiting at the bus stop with me. Duncan, why is that my problem? Delit, it means he wasn't where he was supposed to be or where he usually is. Duncan, can we just stop talking about it? I don't care. Duncan's agitation is visible in the way he folds his fingers and then stretches them again. Delit's knuckles feel a twitch, seeing the way his fingers are folding in and out with bruises and cuts decked out on his knuckles, like frosting on a cake. They're unnaturally red and sore, purple grazing the sides of the sores that makes it look even more discolored than Delit's skin looked. Delit, that looks like it hurts. Duncan, not if you've been using them like that for a while. Delit, if you like hitting things so much, why don't you just do boxing or wrestling or something? Duncan's fists ball up, his wrists twitching with the amount of force in his nerves. Duncan, 'Cause then your victims get to walk away. I want the bloodshed, Delit. I like the bloodshed. Gives me the green light. Delit was about to ask Duncan, but the sound of Duncan's jaw twisting and then cracking a joint in his neck made him almost swallow his tongue. Duncan bounced off the branch onto another, climbing his way down. Delit soon followed. He landed feet flat on the ground like a cat before Delit almost fell face forward on the grass, if Duncan didn't grab his abdomen with his legs still entangled in the branches. He pulled him out and flipped him around like a fork in between his fingers. When Delit was placed on his feet by Duncan, Duncan was immediately, just a second afterwards, making his way to the back area of the yard where the rocks were sat, piled up almost like a wall, but it happened by accident, looking more like an avalanche the more Delit analyzed it. Duncan jumped on the top of the rock wall, turning his attention to Delit. "Duncan, you want to see something cool?" Duncan bit his lower lip, a hint of a sparkle in his eye. It's the kind of smile a little boy has in a candy shop promised a treat. Delit, sure. Delit followed him as he kept walking on the wall of rocks, eventually entering a territory where the trees felt more like hands wrapping them in one particular corner of the backyard. The atmosphere grew more damp. The smell of it was a muddy swamp. The sounds that echoed from the things that were breeding in between the long grass sticking out from the side of the track that led them deeper was making Delit uneasier with every step he took. He almost reached out to hold on to Duncan, but Duncan's bare foot, still in his pajamas, acting like this is just a casual walk to the bathroom. "Duncan, it's gonna stink, but you gotta promise not to tell anybody." Duncan turned around, Delit almost walking right into his chest. Delit tilted his head up to look at Duncan. The innocent smile turned into one that reminds him of a boy trying to scare a girl. "Duncan, you're not gonna tell anyone, right?" Duncan holds up his pinky. The pinky looks painful. It's been through more in Duncan's lifetime than any of these trees have ever survived. Delit held out his pinky. He almost completely forgot what Duncan had said before producing the last finger on his hand. He curled his finger around Delit's, almost locking the joint out of place. He turned around and ducked underneath a left turn in between the branches after making a pinky promise, down a hatch that led them into a cave of rocks. Duncan skid down the slide of rocks first before Delit slipped behind him, crashing into his back before he got pulled to his feet where Duncan grabbed his wrist. He's not gentle at all, as Delit feels the grip still several seconds after Duncan removed his hold on him. Delit had time to process his surroundings. He knew Duncan wasn't wrong. It smells horrible here. It's worse than sewage poking a part of his senses that feel unnerved by the feeling of being this close to something that smells that horrible. This can't be safe. Duncan and Delit walk a little deeper into the caves. The sight of almost 100 flies scattering off the corpse of a dead animal causes Delit to put his hand over his mouth, his other one reaching for his pocket, regretting the fact that he left his phone at home. For some reason, the sight of these exposed carcasses makes it seem like something that Duncan would want to hush him over, but Duncan just retorts with snorting laughter. "Duncan, that's the best kind of therapy. You know, bloodshed." Duncan raises his fist to give Delit an indication of what was used to end the lives of domestic animals. They're all tossed into one pile, the stack almost looking like a shrine of sacrifices for a type of cult. From cats to dogs to a goat. Most are creatures that either came from a farm or were domesticated pets that ran away from home. Duncan looks at the pile, his eyebrows placed several inches further from his lashes, expressing that the sight of this pile makes him content with life. Delit is barely holding on to his breath, keeping himself standing next to Duncan. He turns around, letting his back face the pile. He holds his breath and keeps his hands on his nostrils, his innards crushing his stomach, desperate to push his stomach acid out from his mouth. He attempts to rush back up to the cave, but Duncan grabs his hips. He scrapes hands full of rocks as Duncan manages to pull him away from the exit of the hole. But instead of pulling him back into the cave, Duncan lifts Delit a little higher, pushing him out from the top. Duncan climbs the rocks up behind Delit, but he's already taken off running. He ran towards the door, but ran right into Daniel, jumping in his arms by accident. He clung to the larger man's chest and threw his legs up like a scared female before Duncan came casually striding out from the back of the yard. Daniel, "Duncan, are you chasing kids in the woods again?" Duncan shrugged his shoulders and pouted his lips. Delit dropped to his feet, releasing Daniel's collar. Daniel, Mom got marshmallows and chocolate if you wanted some. She also got rasped coconut and donut sprinkles. Duncan, what do you say, Delit? Both brothers turning to look at him. His facial expression is twisted like the color in his skin morphed into an aging ritual. He looks like he was supposed to experience a heart attack but forgot what that would even be. His eyes darted between the boys, shoving his hands in his pockets. He just nodded. Delit, sounds good. Duncan slowly nodded. The look in his eyes was empathy, or regret. He hopes it was empathy because if it just so happened to be regret, he might end up with more regret than Duncan. Not that Duncan would see that as a bad thing, since Delit's sure Duncan wouldn't have hesitated if it weren't for Daniel's presence. Duncan obtained the mannerisms of a 10-year-old while being in the same vicinity as Daniel. The sight made Delit almost forget what he saw, but not the smell. He couldn't even look at the marshmallows in the same way. Despite having broken the bones and the facial structures of most of the pile, the maggots took a liking to the damp breeding grounds of carcasses and blew out their stomachs like they were bloated. He shudders, trying to bite through a chocolate-covered marshmallow. He can't unsee what he saw. But biting through it encourages Duncan to remain in a childlike daze, which keeps everyone, including Delit, at peace with his presence. It hurts when Delit thought Duncan was more normal than he was giving him credit for, but all things tend to work out if the pit of intuition gets taken more seriously.